Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. This is our 133rd show. Today's guest is Bill Berman, co-author of Influence and Impact. And Bill, we're thrilled to have you. And I also want to thank the audience. We just won our 4th international award this past week. And I have to say, it's thanks to the authors and the audience who really participates that's made this happen. So I'm so appreciative.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
My pleasure. So Bill, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your professional background?
So I'm not one of these people who has a straight line career. I've done a number of things in my life, including trying out being a chef, which was great fun. But I realized it was not a good way to spend your time. So I spent the first third of my career, my professional life as a psychologist, doing research, teaching, and clinical work. In the mid-90s, I shifted gears and started a software company, which is a long story in itself, which I won't bore you with. Ran that software company until 2000, when I sold it just before the dot-com bubble burst to a healthcare information system, and then ran their professional services for 4 years. And in 2004, I left there and thought with a coach that I had a combination of business experience and psychology background. And he thought that I should look into executive coaching, which I did, and have been doing that ever since. So for the past 18 years, I've been working with senior leaders and their teams to help them be more effective and more impactful.
I think you're Mr. Coyne as a voiceover guy with that great voice.
That's my next career. That's the 4th one.
I interviewed Jack Bogle when I wrote magazine columns, and his voice was so deep and such a great baritone. I said the same thing to him, because I could use an agent. I would love to be doing cartoons.
Yeah.
And I said, you probably make more money than you did running Vanguard if you were able to use that voice. You have an amazing voice. So why did you co-author this book?
So I've spent the past, as I said, the past 18 years coaching senior leaders and their teams. And during that time, I found with a large number of the people I was working with, that one of the challenges they would run into, one of the stumbling blocks they'd hit, is that they weren't 100% focused on 2 things: the job that was expected of them and the culture that they needed to operate in. And I wanted to get that message out to people that it's the way to be successful, the way to influence other people, the way to have an impact on an organization is to make sure that you know exactly what your job is, and that you're doing that not based on what you want or what you think, but on what your boss thinks, what your stakeholders thinks, what the organization needs. And that you understand the culture and how the organization operates, how they handle problem solving, how they make decisions, how they handle conflict, and that you operate within that culture. And if you do those 2 things, you get a seat at the table, and people give you the opportunity to have more and more and more impact. And I wanted to share that. And so George and I wrote the book.
And it's a great book and very practical and very useful. So I really enjoyed reading it. From your research, why are most people unhappy with their job? Because I've seen studies in the Harvard Business Review where less than 25% of people are happy professionally.
So there's a number of reasons. One is that they aren't aligned there with what the job is. So their manager and they, or the business and they, don't agree on what their job ought to be. So that makes people unhappy. Another is that their style and their culture isn't aligned to what the organizational culture is. And a third one is that their values don't align with the values of the company or the culture. And of course, there's always the 4th one, which is your manager's an a-hole.
That's just the technical term.
There you go.
Yeah. So does influence and impact mean different things to different age groups?
You know, I don't think it's as much the age group as it is the position in the organization. So I think whether, and part of this is because people are moving up so fast in organizations with some of these fast growth tech companies. But if you're an individual contributor or an early stage manager, you're mostly focused on what you need to get done and what your manager expects from you. And you build influence and impact through that. At a more senior level, you know, at a VP level, it's really about your business function and how that works and how your team is operating. And then if you're in the C-suite, it's more about how are you having an impact, not just on the business, but on the industry and the sector. And how are you having an impact on your investors? So it really shifts based on what your role is in the company. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just summed up. So I love the first chapter or title because few people think this way, which is get what you want by doing what your organization needs. How do you get people to think that way, especially younger people who are thinking about themselves first and not necessarily the organization?
I think it's very hard. I think people have to have a couple of tough lessons before they get there. And in part are if you look at what books sell and what podcasts are really popular, they're the ones that are telling you to follow your bliss and do what you think is best and speak up and live your truth, none of which is bad. But in organizations, particularly large organizations, you're a very small part of that, and you can't live your own truth and be successful in that. You have to, just like if you move to Japan and you try to act like a New Yorker or a Philadelphian in Japan, it's not going to work very well. You have to learn to adapt to the environment that you're in. And it's the same thing. If you're working in a big company, you have to find ways to adapt to the way the culture operates and you'll get lots of positive feedback for that. You'll get opportunities, you'll get endorsements, you'll get people looking at you if you can flex your style and you don't hold on to things that aren't really critical to who you are, so that you can become a part of that larger culture.
Yeah, I think especially large companies, when they move managers up and they want to move them to different countries to give them different country and cultural experiences, they actually don't do much coaching of them before they actually leave, so
Right.
that they know to adapt to the culture, not that the culture has to adapt to them. Hence,
Right.
there becomes a lot of friction. I've had a friend who worked for a French company, they had French managers, and they just didn't understand or try to understand the American culture. And that happens with Americans.
Absolutely. And it happens in the UK, it happens in France, it happens in Germany, it happens in Asia. And there's a concept in the organization development world called learning agility. And I think a key piece of learning agility is cultural agility. And that's the ability to pick up on the signals that other people are giving about how they operate in the world, and adapting those and learning those. It's not like you're giving up a key part of your identity. It's how you play in other people's sandboxes.
Yeah, I've learned, I worked 9 years in Latin America and learned in the beginning about people, what time do people actually show up for meetings?
Yeah.
And when they don't have news for you, unlike Americans where we expect to hear one way or the other, they just don't do it.
Right.
If I don't have good news to tell you, even if we're the best of friends,
Yep.
you're not hearing from me. It might be like, oh my God, it's driving me nuts.
And
But
I've had the same experience where I've gone into a meeting with Latin American folks and jumped right into the business of the meeting, and they were terribly insulted because I
yeah,
didn't spend time talking to them and getting to know them a little bit and sharing who we were. And it's small things like that can have huge impacts on your ability to influence other people.
I taught 18 years at universities, and one semester I was teaching a pretty sizable group of Asians in my class, mostly from China.
Mhm.
And those students were not used to a professor who asked them what they thought. Used to professors telling them things, they write it down, then they spit it back out at you in the test.
Right.
And so some of my students from National University of Singapore said, hey, you better go out to dinner with them so they get to know you and you get to know them, so they will be responsive and they won't kill you on their when they rate you at the end of the semester. And it was very, very good sound advice for sure. We have a question from the audience. Why do you think coaching is so effective if one is open to coaching? Is it holding people accountable or more of inspirational and motivation?
I think it's a combination of the two, actually, William. It's a good question. I think that an effective coach helps their clients see the best parts of themselves and actualize the best parts of themselves. And they motivate them to focus on those strengths. But at the same time, they hold them accountable for doing what they say they're going to do, for living that optimal life and making sure that they're optimizing the things that they do and the contribution they make. So I really think it's a combination of both of those.
Before taking a job, aside from compensation, what should you look at to determine if it's the right opportunity for you? And now, because of Zoom and everything, could be working for somebody in Hanoi, Vietnam. It doesn't really matter, especially if you're really smart and skilled. So what's your advice there?
So there, and I'm borrowing a bit from George, my co-author George, there are three basic things that you need to make sure of when you're getting a job. First is that you like the work they want you to do. Second is that you're good at the work they want you to do. And third is that you like working with them. So when you interview, are these people you want to spend time with? Are they people you want to talk to? Not necessarily do you want to go out and have a beer or go on a date with them, but are they people you can enjoy spending time with? So it's, can you do the job? Are you going to love the job? And are you going to like working with these people? And if you figure those things out, then you can figure out what the money is. So
I wish I would have gotten that piece of advice in my early 30s when I became CEO of a group of magazines. And every day I was hoping the train would derail on my way there.
Yeah.
I didn't like the people. And I took on the job because it was more money and more challenge, but did not consider these other things. And they're really important to consider, especially when you're praying the train will derail.
You know, and one of the hard things for people is when they get themselves in a job like that, they keep trying and trying and trying and trying to make it work. And it ends up just making them unhappy and making the people they work with unhappy. One of the things that in chapter 6 of the book, we say, now that you know the reality, do you still want this job?
Yeah.
I think it's a critical question for people to ask is like, am I in the right place for me? It's not wrong to say, you know, this doesn't work for me. Your values can be wrong. For that organization, or the values of the organization just don't match with yours, or the skills you need don't match with what you're best at. And you're better off saying, okay, this isn't right. And either looking within that business for better fit, or looking outside for a better fit.
You write, when you're coaching, you look at how the executive spends their time, how they think about their job, and how they do their job. Putting that combination together, what's the outcome? What are you hoping for?
I find that a lot of people tend to do either what they're most comfortable with, or what they did in their last job, or sometimes, not as often, but sometimes what they wish their job was. And when you focus on either what your last job was, or what you're most comfortable with, or what you think you ought to be entitled to, you're going to get distracted and you're going to be doing things that aren't essential to your job. With a lot of my clients, I'll have them start out by writing down what are the core responsibilities of your job, and make a list of those things. So write their own job description, not based on what they thought it should be, but what it actually is. And then have them rate those based on how much time they spend on those, and what are the ones that are absolutely essential for them to get done. And I find again and again and again, people are surprised that they're not doing the things that are most critical for their job. And so what happens is we make a switch and we say, all right, how do you focus on those pieces of your job that are the most essential? And you find all kinds of things, like you have the wrong people in the jobs below you so that you're doing their job, or you're not as comfortable doing those things, so you avoid them. And if you build those skills and build the ability, whether it's to build the right team below you or to build the right relationship with your peers, or to focus on the things that are most important, then you're going to, and build those skills, I think people are consistently more effective in their jobs.
And I think entrepreneurs have the most difficult time giving up all the different pieces that they worked on when they started the business. Do you find that to be the case, where they just don't want to manage and provide the vision? They actually want to continue to get their hands dirty because that's what they were happiest doing.
100%. I think when you're an entrepreneur, you usually start out by doing all kinds of things, anywhere from emptying the trash to getting the funding for the business. And because you did that, you know that those ways work. And so you want to keep doing that. And other people come in and they have other ideas about how things ought to be done. And it's very hard to step back and say, I'm going to let other people do this differently than I do it, and let me focus on the things that are the most important, like fundraising, like setting the vision, like defining the strategy, like building the alliances with other businesses. And because you know those things have worked for you. And so it becomes almost superstitious. You're like, if I don't keep doing that, it's not going to go right. When on many of those things, it actually doesn't matter. But it's very hard for people who have put their life and all their passion into building that business to let go of those little things that they do. And, some of them never do. There's a story about Marriott. I think it was J.W. Marriott, who would literally go into a hotel in the middle of the country and say, why is that carpet that color of blue? Change that carpet out, because that's not our blue. And he was a micromanager, but he was, as you know, incredibly successful.
Sometimes, as Steve Jobs was. I had students at Wharton who worked for him when he was alive, and so if he didn't like something, he would throw it at you.
Yep.
And
I'm not an advocate for that, but
yeah, he was very, very precise. How does one know when decisiveness is needed over collaboration? You write about this in the book, or vice versa.
Yep. So decisiveness and collaboration, it's always both, or almost always both. The question is, how much do you balance it? So if you're in the middle of a crisis, you don't collaborate. You get things done. You say, do this, do this, do this. When people's lives are at stake, you don't sort of get a group together and say, gee, what do you think we should do? You make the decisions based on what you think is right. When there's time, or there's a need for that input and that shared decision making, you listen to other people. And so I think what I would tell most managers is, most of the time you need to collaborate, because you need to listen to other people. You need to hear different ways of thinking about it, and you're not limited to just the way you think about it. But at some point you have to make the decision, and you can't just wait for alignment. And that happens when people fundamentally have different views of how things ought to be done. So most of the time there has to be a tiebreaker. And that's when I think most business people forget that their job is more of a tiebreaker than it is being the one who knows the right answer all the time. I think it limits you when you try to have all the right answers yourself.
I think young CEOs suffer the most from that, because they feel they should have the right answers if people are going to follow them. But I think the older you get, the more you realize there's a lot of ambiguity and gray. and hence you want to hear everybody's opinion and then think it through. Do you agree?
I somewhat, but I think there's a combination, there's a blending of ego and experience in there, because I think there's some people who don't come to these jobs with a lot of ego and realize. I'll tell you a story a friend of mine told, a client of mine told me years ago. He said, Bill, you know why C students make the best CEOs? I said, why? He said, because A students think they can do it all. And so they want to get it all. They want to do it themselves. B students are afraid of the A students, so they don't hire the right people around them. So they have to do it all. And the C students know they can't get it done themselves. So they're always looking for the A student to help them out. So
I think the president of Oklahoma is the one who coined and says it's the A and B students who work for the C students.
yep.
I like that quote.
Yep. Although these days, I think the A students are kind of running the world.
For sure. How important is it looking the part? You would talk about that in the book.
I wish I could say to you it doesn't matter, but it does. If I'm going into a business and the dress code for that business is a suit and tie, and I go in a t-shirt and jeans, I'm not going to get anything done. It doesn't matter how smart I am. It's just not going to be effective. I think we told a story about the guy who went to to ESPN, and everybody in ESPN wears a polo shirt and khakis, and he went in a three-piece suit, and he couldn't get anything done because it's all, again, it goes back to the issue of culture. Are you a member of the culture? And there are signs and symbols of what the culture is, and some of them are how you dress and how you look. And in the ideal world with that, it wouldn't matter, but it does. And so I think it's not the only thing that matters. It's not the biggest thing that matters, but it's one of those things that why put a barrier in front of you? Why not remove that barrier and let other people see you as part of the team?
What does an employee who loves their job and company do if they can't get along with their manager? And what should the company do if they can't find common ground?
It's really interesting. I think this is a huge problem because, as you know, the statistics are that like 60 to 70% of people leave their jobs because of their manager. And I think there are two sides to it. One is you have to figure out if you're disagreeing about things that matter, or if you're disagreeing about form.
Style over substance.
Absolutely. But and again, it's about being flexible. This is not a democracy. The manager gets to decide what your role is. And if you choose to fight on that, you're fighting an uphill battle. I'm not saying don't do it, but be prepared that the odds are not in your favor. But companies make a huge mistake is that they don't, when they're evaluating managed people, they're oftentimes not looking at how do they treat their people? What are they getting out of their people? They're thinking about, are you delivering on your number or on your reports or on your, whatever it is that you have to get done. And it's really important that people start using what we call upward feedback as a critical part of how managers get evaluated, because managers are essential to getting the work done. And if they can't bring their people along, it's not going to be effective. But if your manager is doing things that you think are unethical or unfair or unreasonable, it's absolutely reasonable for you to go above your manager's head to address that with somebody senior. Be prepared that may not go all that well, but if they're discriminating against you or they're abusive against you, you absolutely have to do something about that.
And then you'll find out if that's the right culture for you. If management looks the other way,
That's exactly
as
right.
so many, unfortunately, so many companies do.
Yep.
You write about people realizing what distracts them. What are some of the most distracting things and how can you fix them? I mean, I have to tell you, reels, if I get caught watching reels on Facebook, I need
Well.
AA for that.
You know, there are enormous distractions. There are the ego-based distractions. So it's, what is my competitor getting? What is that other person getting? What are they doing? Is that better than what I have? So there's those sort of ego-based distractions. Then there are the tactical distractions like reels, like you said, and Instagram and you know, Twitter. It's going to be interesting to see what Elon Musk does with Twitter now, by the way.
Scary.
I agree. It's the, I think there are those tactical distractions, you know, so there's all the stimulation around you. There's ego distractions and there's political distractions. You know, how do you shut off some of the political drama that you're encountering on a day-to-day basis and focus on your job? And you know, how we behave, the other pieces, how we behave in our social life is not necessarily how we want to behave in the work life. And those are big distractions as well. So I think it's really easy to get focused on the wrong stuff.
The advice you give about your job may not be what you were told or what you want it to be, often throws people off, and often they get disillusioned. Hear that all the time.
Yep.
What's your advice to them?
Basically, it's learn to understand what the job really is, right? Companies change job descriptions all the time. People often think, I'm going to take a job and that's going to be my job. And what they don't realize, or what they haven't figured out yet, is that every time you get a new manager, your job changes. Every time your manager's manager changes, your job changes. And there is no such thing as a single stable job, right? Even if you have the same job title, even if you're sitting in the same seat, when your manager changes, you have a new job and you better figure out what that's supposed to be. And again, it comes back to flexibility. You have to be able to adapt to the situation that you're in. And that's hard for people. People like to know that things are predictable and consistent and reliable. But in this world, with things changing all the time, things are not reliable and things are not consistent, and you have to learn to adapt to that. So it's, to me, the message is be more adaptable, be more flexible.
Well, by the way, what did you think of Elon Musk firing the top 2 leaders at Twitter before he even walked in the door? And would you have recommended, if you were coaching Elon, to pull that trigger so quickly? And what was the statement he was making there, aside that there's going to be big change?
I think the only time that I think it's reasonable to do that is when you think the business is on the edge of a precipice. And if you think the business is on the edge of a precipice, then yeah, you may need to fire people right away and put somebody in charge. But would I have recommended he do what he's going to do? It would be very hard for me to coach Elon Musk because I don't think he thinks the way other people think. And I don't think he listens to anybody but himself. But I also think he's playing a chess game that's a pretty complex one. And so he wanted to give a clear message of Twitter of September 2022 is not the Twitter of November 2022. And it's a different world and better get used to it. And I think that's what he wanted to get the message across, and he got it across loud and clear.
Apparently, he walked in with a sink, and he had one of his people go to Lowe's and purchase him a sink. So when he walked in, the imagery of this sink was going to be there. And I guess he's washing away the past.
Somebody else said, you know, I'm in charge, let that sink in.
Yeah, right. That's what it was. Yeah.
Again, wouldn't have been my choice, but I think I think he thinks in a particular way. And thought that was an impactful statement. Certainly people are going to remember that, but I think it's going to become a meme that he may or may not love.
And I guess he doesn't care at the end of the day because success is just, he's one of the most successful people in history of the world.
Right.
So it's hard to question him, and hence people will throw money. If he came up with the newest toilet paper, people will give him billions of dollars because they figure this guy's brilliant. There must be something behind this.
Well, and part of it is because he doesn't just come up with toilet paper. He comes up with a commercial approach to space, which has been incredibly successful. I mean, and Tesla is arguably one of the best electric cars on the market. So it's, you know, he delivers on what he's talking about. So,
and he perseveres.
I don't have to like him, but I have to respect what he's doing.
No question. Question from the audience. Have you ever had a client that you felt would benefit more from another coach's approach, such as when a tennis player might make a change of coach due to style or personality differences?
I usually don't know that right from the beginning. There are a few people that I'm not quite as good with as others. I think very quiet people I don't do quite as well with. But I think in general, it's something that we figure out along the way. And we see whether the methods and the style of coaching that I have is helping them make progress. And we usually find that out in about 3 months. So if they haven't been able to make some progress in the first 2 to 3 months, I will often think, you know, am I the right person for you? Is this the right experience for you? People learn different ways and people connect differently. And I think that in my firm, we always give people a choice of 2 coaches. So we always do chemistry meetings with 2 different coaches, because a part of having a good coaching relationship is you click with the individual, and that sort of chemistry is just, there's no predicting it. So we always make sure people have at least a choice between 2 people, if not more.
A very popular method of providing feedback was the 360, and yet I've heard experts say that it isn't as helpful as they once thought it was. What is your take on that? Because you write about getting the people around you to provide feedback to maximize your contribution and hopefully happiness.
360s are a really, really important tool in the hands of a good coach. And I think in the hands of a coaching relationship, it is an invaluable tool to helping people grow. Where it isn't as effective, 360s have become completely commoditized. So you can go out and you can get your HR department will put you onto a 360 software platform, and you'll get tons of feedback, but you don't know, even though they give you instructions on how to interpret it, you often don't know how to interpret it. You don't know what to do with it. And the biggest problem with 360s is the average person will skip over all the numeric feedback, read through the comments that people have written, and zero in on the one person who says you're a schmuck. And they'll obsess over that, and who was that, and why did they say it, and what was that about? And they miss they miss the forest for the trees. But it's human nature to focus on the person who dislikes you and focus on that. So I think that's really the reason why 360s don't work when they work. We tend to focus, when you get a 360, we tend to focus on what's bad and not pay attention to what's going really well. And people succeed because of their strengths. They fail because of their weaknesses. Right. So your weaknesses can undermine you, but fundamentally you're successful because you have strengths and you leverage those strengths, and people see those strengths, and you don't let those weaknesses get in the way. You know, every athlete, like a good golfer, you know, if my drive is my strength, I'm going to focus on my drive. I'm not going to focus on whether I can get out of the sand pit, you know, super effectively. Just, I want to be able to get onto the green. I don't want to sit there whacking away, but I've got to, you know, I want to take advantage of what I do best and emphasize that. And it's the same in the workplace. You've got to focus on your strengths, and 360s have a tendency to pull you into what are you doing wrong.
And I think you're right, because your whole book basically is about playing to your strengths. And I think people are happier when they do play to their strengths, and realize over time you're never going to be good at that. Don't beat yourself up.
Nobody's good at everything. Brilliant football players aren't great as baseball players. We know that, right?
Right.
Good physicists aren't good writers necessarily, but so you play to what you're best at, and you leverage that. You look for ways to use that to your advantage and to the advantage of the organization that you work for. And that's how you're going to be most successful.
What if you get a great paying job, but you feel you don't fit into the culture and you really don't want to leave because the job is exactly what you wanted and the money is amazing? What do you advise there? And you talked a little bit about this earlier.
I think so we talked about this in terms of the cultural agility. Can you flex your style? Can you flex your approach to being more like that organization? And it's, some of those things you can change and some of those things you can't. If you're a very extroverted person and you're working in a very introverted culture, it's going to be very hard for you to be successful, because if you have to act more introverted, that's going to be a struggle for you. You can do it, but it's tiring and it's frustrating. And the same thing for other things. We have personality characteristics that are baked in to who we are. And if the organization you're working with can't work that way, you have to be, it just may not work. I worked for a firm early on in my career, and I'm a pretty extroverted person. And this was a very introverted place. So you couldn't go and knock on somebody's door and say, hey, you got a minute? Because they'd be like, no, I don't have a minute. And why are you bothering me in the first place? So it's really a problem of learning to adapt to that. So I was able to flex, and I was able to stop knocking on people's doors and stop dropping by. And I would email them and say, can you let me know when you have a few minutes? And it was frustrating for me, and I thought it was silly, but that was how the place had to operate, and that was their culture, and I wasn't going to change the culture by myself. So I think you got to think about, can I adapt? Can I shift gears? Can I be more? Can I give? Because the culture is the way you say, I'm one of you. I'm part of the team. And so you got to look for ways to flex your style to fit more with the culture that you're in. And no matter how good paying it is, if you're miserable day to day, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, no question about it. You just want to get the hell out of there. You write about developing a plan to move and getting a fresh start. When do you know it's time? And many organizations today prefer an employee to have worked with a variety of companies. So how does one determine if it's the right time, or should they move on for growth reasons? Hey, I think I could grow more by just leaving, even though you're happy and they're thrilled to have you there.
It's a great question. I had to advise my son on this a little bit, because he had been in a company for 5 years, was being very successful, but felt like he'd learned most of what it was he needed to learn. And he was like, debating about whether he should stay in that company or move on or look for a different job in that company. And I think in many cases, when it's time to move on. I mean, I think that when you're bored, when you don't see a career path, when you're not working with people who you value and respect, those are times when it's time for you to move. Those are signals that it's time for you to move on. I think if you feel challenged, or you're interested in what the company's doing, or you're working with people who you feel value you and are valuable to you, I think then think about staying in that company, and think about how can you grow within that role? And I have to say, I've seen people who have stayed in the same company for 30 years who are incredibly successful. And I've seen people who have shifted gears every 3-4 years and are incredibly successful. So I think it varies depending on the individual, what works best. But I think you have to focus on, do I feel like I'm making a contribution? Do I feel like I'm growing is this job meeting my needs? And am I enjoying myself on a day-to-day basis? Do I look forward to going into work more than I dread going into work? And I think if the answer is you dread it more than you look forward to it, it's time to move on.
How do you position yourself in a job interview to look like the best candidate? And if you were let go from your first job, do you disclose that early in the interview, wait until they ask, or how should you answer that question?
Well, that's about 4 questions in one. So how do you position yourself for a job interview? I think everything we've been talking about is critical to that. You have to know what you're really good at. You have to know where you can have an impact, and you have to make sure that that job is that those strengths and those interests line up with what the company is doing. One of the mistakes that people make, and we write about this in the book, is that they're anxious about getting that job, so they cast a very wide net. So they're willing to apply for any job that looks even vaguely like what they might be interested in. And then what happens is, of course, they don't get chosen for some of those jobs. Maybe they make it, into the second round or third round of interviews, or maybe they even make it to the finals. But they don't get chosen because they didn't make sure that the job lines up with what their strengths and interests and values are. And so, of course, the company starts to pick up on that and they don't give you the job. The problem is when you're looking for a job, you fail every single time until you get a job, and then you've succeeded, but then you've stopped. So you only get one positive reinforcement and hunt dozens of negative reinforcements. And so you're looking for a job, you never get reinforced because we never think, oh, gee, I made it to the third round, I'm doing really well, right? You think, oh, I only made it to the third round, I failed. And so it's a very frustrating experience until you find the job that works for you. So I think know your values, know your interests and preferences, and know your strengths and weaknesses, and make sure that the job you're interviewing lines up for that. Aside from that, you're in a sales position until they've offered you the job. So focus on convincing them that this is the right job for you and that you're the right person for them, and then figure out whether it's really the job that you want, right? So you're selling before you buy, but sell to the right, do what any good salesperson is, qualify the sale, right? Make sure that it fits with what your interests are and it fits with what your strengths are.
And what happens if you were let go at a position? How soon do you disclose that?
Well, it's going to show up on your resume. So I think that, you've got a few weeks between, if you've been let go and you're not employed, you've got a couple of weeks before you have to tell people. And I think you have to be able to tell people a reasonable story. It's a lot more about what you don't do than what you do. I think you have to be very careful about telling people that you left because your boss was a jerk, or that you thought the company was going the right direction. Because when you do that, the other person's going to think, I wonder what they're going to say about me. Right. So you have to think about not only what is my story going to tell them about me, but what is it going to tell them about how I'm going to think about them. And so be very careful about the story you tell people and make sure you don't want to lie. Clearly, you want to tell some version of the truth. But if you feel like, that your boss was unreasonable, then tell them that you thought there was a difference of opinion about how things should get done. And you thought it would be handled better if you went to a company where you agreed on those things.
I think it never helps to be negative about the place you were just at before, the person you work for, even if it were true, because it just sets a bad tone for the people who are interviewing you, wondering what they're going to get if you've easily talk about negatively about the people you just worked with.
I learned that a version of that as a coach, because I was talking to a number of people and they were talking about their boss who would talk about the other employees to that employee. So he would talk about their peers to each other. And whenever he did that, people would think, oh, wow, I wonder what he says about me. And it never occurred to him that people would think that. He thought he was being open and conversational with them and bringing them under the tent. And in fact, what he was doing was making them very anxious about how he talks about them. So I think it's really a bad idea in general to talk about other people to other people.
A question from the audience. What advice do you have for someone who changed careers and is looking for a new job in a different field?
That's a great question. And I know a number of people who have tried to switch gears. And I think what you want to think about are what I call generalizable skills. So it's not the technical skills that you bring to the table that are going to be important when you try to do that. It's going to be what are your writing skills? What are your communication skills? Because those are important anywhere. What are your problem solving skills? What are your collaboration skills? What are your networking abilities? So it's those things that we do in every single job that aren't specific to the job, but are critical to getting that job done. So think about those. What are my generalizable skills that I can bring to the table? And at the same time, let them know, how are you going to learn the technical aspects of the job that you're looking for? How are you going to get comfortable with that? And how are you going to get up to speed? So play to your strengths and have a plan for how you're going to address those gaps. And I think that's how you sell yourself to a new industry or a new sector.
You write about discrimination in organizations, which come in a variety of flavors, ethnicity to college, to background, to body type, etc. You mentioned that is just reality. How do you fight through to get your seat at the table without holding a grudge or worse, just giving up?
I think it's important, full disclosure, I have more privilege than I know what to do with. I'm a upper middle class white male from a successful family. And so I didn't write the chapter on discrimination and bias. I had a colleague of mine write that who had much more expertise in that area. But what I will tell you is that there's all kinds of discrimination and bias in any setting that you go into. And I think you have to figure out what you're willing to tolerate, what you're willing to put up with, how much conflict you're willing to deal with, and how much you want to fight to get what you want, as opposed to looking for a place where you can get what you want without fighting. So there's work involved in both cases. You have to decide what you want to do. If you're in a place, most successful Black men and Black people and women that I've met will tell you that they have had to put up with various types of discrimination to get to be successful in their role. And it's just they said it's just something you have to put up with. You have to accept that that's going to be there, and you have to get around it. In the book, Greg Pennington, who wrote that chapter, talks about it as there's a black tax. And I've seen that with women. There's a female tax. You have to be that much better than other people. And, you know, it happens all the time. And I don't think there's any way around it.
There's a section in the book that talks about dealing with stakeholders. How do you work with them? How do you define what a stakeholder is? What kinds of questions should you ask them, which you mentioned in the book, and where can you provide the greatest value?
So who your stakeholders are varies depending on the level of the job that you have. So as a vice president or a senior vice president, I have a much bigger stakeholder network than I do as an individual contributor. But your stakeholders are anybody who rely on you for their job to be successful, or whom you rely on for your job to be successful. And people tend to cast a very narrow net. The biggest mistake people make is they think about their boss and maybe the one or two other people that they work with on a regular basis, and they don't go beyond that. And what you really want to know is, what do you expect from me? What can I do to make your job make you more successful? How can we work together to get us both to be successful? And what's important for me to know in this organization? If you start out by asking people, and listen, I think that's the real critic, is listen to anybody who's relevant to your job, and ask them, what do they need? What are they looking for? What have people who have done this job in the past been successful? What did they do? And what do you need from me? And really listen to that. People make the mistake of going into those relationships and trying to sell them, trying to tell them what it is they're really good at. And what you want to find out is, what do you need from me? We have a tool in the book that's called a stakeholder map, and a stakeholder communication plan. And those are key elements to how you do that. And if you take the time, particularly when you're new in a job, to identify who those stakeholders are and come up with a plan of how you're going to talk to those people and how you're going to interact with them, you're going to be much more successful, because most jobs are not solo jobs anymore. Most jobs have some degree of involvement with other people. So that's building those relationships. People are more willing to answer emails for people they know and like, or answer text messages or Slack messages. They're going to respond to you if they like you and they feel like you respond to them. And so that's really the key, is knowing who those people are. And if you're not sure, ask your boss, ask other people in the organization, and ask the people you're talking to, who else should I talk to? Who do you think would be useful for me to talk to about this job or about my career?
All the book is really for individuals to enhance their own success. How can you use your methodology to help your employees and those around you enhance their skills and satisfaction?
You know, the last chapter in the book is what we call a primer for managers. And there's a set of very simple guidelines that you can give to your team members that will help them do that. One of the things this sounds self-serving, but one of the things I would tell you to do is give them the book.
That's true, because it has all the processes in there.
You know, I knew we were going to be successful when my editor read the proposal for the book, and he said, I'm going to give this to one of my people because they're not doing what I need them to do. They're not focused on the right thing. And I said, okay, this is going to be successful because people are going to want to give it to their employees.
Please talk about creating a psychological safety and building authentic trust with employees.
So psychological safety is a concept that was developed by Amy Edmondson and was developed by some work at Google about creating an environment in which people feel comfortable raising questions, challenging authority, identifying problems, and making it clear that those, and without there being personal consequences to doing that. And the research on that has been done in medical settings and in manufacturing settings, where people have made significant mistakes or there have been life-threatening problems arise because somebody's afraid to say that that's the wrong thing to do. And there are big stories like the Challenger disaster or the airplane that crashed because it ran out of fuel, very dramatic ones, but the people die in hospitals on a regular basis because somebody didn't say that prescription doesn't make sense. Or that person is having side effects from that post-surgery. Those are places where you have to be comfortable raising problems, but doctors historically have been very unresponsive to that. But the reality is, if you do absolutely nothing, people do not feel psychologically safe. So you can't just be neutral and have people feel like it's okay to raise problems, because people are deferential to authority. They are afraid of authority. They're afraid of losing their job. Even so, you have to actively encourage people to identify problems, to raise issues, to challenge your authority, because otherwise they're going to be afraid of you. So it is an active process of encouraging discussion, debate, challenge in your environment, whether it's your team or your business, and to create psychological safety. But it will have enormous benefit if you do that.
You write about one of the stakeholders is the trusted colleague. What signs do you look for if you can trust someone and that they won't gain your confidence only to stab you in the back later?
I think most people have an intuitive sense of what that's like. But I think you can, and I think you should trust your judgment on that. But I think some of the external signs you want to look for is what has that person said about other people? What do you see them doing? And, are they playing to the leaders, or are they playing to their peers? Who do they seem to value? And who have they built trust with? So if they're going to be a trusted advisor to you, they're probably a trusted advisor to somebody else. So you have to look at what their motivations are and pay attention to what you see them doing. And most of us focus on the nonverbal signals that people give, and that's the right thing. You want to watch what people do, not what they say, and watch how they interact with people, not what they say about how they interact with people. So I think those are some of the key signals that you want to look for. Is, do they hold confidence? Do they tell you about what other people said, or do they keep really pretty quiet about those sorts of things? Are they willing to help you to solve a problem, or do they mostly look for you to help them solve a problem? So I think those are some of the key elements that are really important.
So last question, people are so competitive for titles, money, and power. How do you get them to help others maximize their potential is good for them?
It's you have to create a culture where all boats rise on a rising tide. Most of the time, we are not playing zero-sum games with our colleagues. If you're in a sales role, you're not playing a zero-sum game with the other salespeople, because in fact, it's all about how you perform, and you've got different territories and different responsibilities. And so it's really, if you focus on how I'm doing and work. So in a sales group, for example, if you can talk to other people and find out what they're doing that's successful and are willing to share what you're doing that's successful, you're all going to get better. And, it's salespeople have a tendency to compete with each other, but that's not who you're competing with. You're competing with the outside. And so it's seeing how can we get to a win-win rather than a zero-sum, a win-lose situation with the people I'm working with.
Bill, I got to say thank you so much for spending the time with us. Love the book. You're right. People should get that book and give it away to other people besides
Absolutely.
using it for themselves. I hope you'll come out with another book and we'll have you again.
I would love that, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and it's been a great audience. So I've really enjoyed myself. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you next Friday. Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.